Hey everyone, and welcome to Read This Now, the weekly webcast where Brad Gustafson and I share two books that we love and that we think you should read right now. Savvy watchers will notice that my guest today is not Brad Gustafson, rather the living legend herself, the book whisperer, my mentor and friend, Donalyn Miller. Hey, Donalyn.
Hey, Jennifer.
I'm so
How are
excited that you're
you?
here.
Thanks for inviting me to do this.
Oh my gosh, thank
It's
you for saying
cold and
that.
gray outside. Talking about books is just what I needed.
I feel like I need it every single day.
True story.
And having you here is like a bucket list item. Check, now I'm done.
Thanks for inviting me on the show. I know you and Brad always have so much fun book talking and you share so many great titles. So thank you for inviting me to be here.
Oh, well, Brad has, and this is really sad, a dentist appointment today. So not only is he missing a really fun show, but he's having some tooth drilled or something, which is much
Listen,
less fun.
recommending books to go to the dentist. That sounds awful.
I know, poor guy. But we're going to make up for it and have a
Maybe
great
we'll
time.
recommend something Brad will like.
I hope so. You know, Brad and I, it's always so funny. I would say sometimes my knee-jerk reaction is to say that Brad and I don't always like the same books. And then he will surprise me and love something that I totally love. So you never know. I think we're both just lovers of good books, even though I think he tends to skew a little bit younger than me. But I want to start with a book this week, Donalyn. First of all, I have to make us both feel old. Do you remember Nikki Grimes' Bronx Masquerade?
Yes.
Okay, so in preparing for this book talk, I thought, when was that published? And I looked it up, and can you believe it was 18 years ago?
Oh, we've been around a long time, sister.
I couldn't even believe it.
But you know what?
I
That book is just as relevant today. I can still get kids to read Bronx
I
Masquerade. This
know,
is the genius of Nikki Grimes.
indeed. You
And
know,
that book is just as relevant, sadly, in some ways, but just as relevant 18 years later. It's still fantastic.
and just the community, this idea of building community and shared experience is still, it's like universal, right? And she writes in a way that's both gorgeous and accessible. To me, that is magic. Like,
Mhm.
it's gorgeous and it's accessible. That's pretty magical right there. I used to call Bronx Masquerade one of my 100% books. Like, I would clutch it to my chest and tell kids, okay, 100% of the kids that I have recommended this book to have loved it. So I can't end my winning streak now. And I would tell them all about how much I loved it. I did. I just love that book so much. So I was excited to pick up, I don't know if you've read it, her semi-new memoir.
Yes.
I know, Ordinary Hazards, which is, I've never read a memoir in verse before. And now, of course, she would write it in verse, but it's the story really of not just her life, but her life as a writer, like how the crushing fear and darkness of her childhood blossomed and turned her into a writer filled with hope and beauty. And as I was reading it, I kept thinking back to Bronx Masquerade and all the ways I might pair it together, like all the ways I might take some of her poems and some of her notebook excerpts from this book and see if kids could draw some parallels, between her own experiences and how that might inform her creation of characters in all of her books. But Bronx Masquerade, having a special place in my heart, was the one that I kept thinking about. And I thought I might, real quick, if you will indulge me, I thought I might read one of the poems real fast, because I just love this one. I marked it. I marked a lot of them, but I marked this one in particular. This is, of course, because it is a novel in verse, it does tell the story of her life from birth into adulthood. But this particular poem occurs the night after the very first time that she grabs a notebook and just starts to write down her feelings as she's sitting alone in the bedroom of yet another foster home in the dark, afraid and questioning why she's even in the world. And after that, this poem captures the moment just after that. It's called Secret. And she writes, I slipped the tear-smudged page into my dresser drawer. Those words were strictly for God and me. Besides, this writing thing was some kind of magic trick I didn't yet understand, except for this. Magicians rarely share their secrets. And I just love that. And from then on, she begins this journey really of healing despite the terrible things that continue to happen, because she's found writing and words and reading and how story will transform her. So I loved it. And in the spirit of our dear friend John Shu, I want to undress it by showing not just the beautiful dust jacket, but this book also, if you have the hardcover, has a secret gift underneath of a beautiful full color version on the case cover. So that is Ordinary Hazards by Nikki Grimes, and I think you should read it right now.
It's fantastic. She's a genius. Everything she writes.
Oh, I agree.
Genius.
Have you ever met her?
Yes. In fact, I was just with her in Puerto Rico at a conference.
Oh my gosh. Now, this is a moment where I'm having like this weird fangirl moment, but I don't care how long this show lasts now. I need you to tell me everything about that. Was she
Well, it was during the earthquakes, but of course we were very privileged in that we were at a resort that had its own generator, its own water. But we were there for a conference, and Nikki won a Lifetime Achievement Award from the organization. And so I got to hear her speak, and she's just as lovely in person as you would imagine. And she read some of her poems from some of her books, including Ordinary Hazards. It was wonderful.
And I know that although I read this with my eyes rather than my ears, I know that she read the audiobook for this as well, which I think would make it an even more magical experience. But
talking to friends who evaluate audiobooks in a way that's more probably rigorous than you and I do it, I would say that that authors aren't always the best narrators of their own books, so I've been told. But poets, I think about Nikki Grimes, I think about Jason Reynolds reading their own books, narrating their own audio. They're really fantastic. Who can read the poetry like the poet?
Exactly. And because poetry is a medium that's really meant to be heard, to be spoken aloud, a poet understands the rhythm they intended and the punch on certain words. So I do think there's a lot of value to listening when they narrate their own books. But you're right. Sometimes the author, that's just not that's not their gift. Sometimes the author isn't necessarily the best person to read their work. But in this case, I don't know, I haven't listened to it, but I would like to. I'm adding it to my list. So what do you got for us this week?
Oh my goodness. Well, I've been traveling a bit, and so traveling means rental cars, and rental cars means audiobooks for Donalyn. And so I got new noise canceling headphones for Christmas. So I've been taking them with me. And so I just finished Frankly in Love by David Yoon. Have you had a chance to read this yet, Jennifer?
I knew what it was by the page, the dark blue on the page.
There is a video online. Did you show this to me or did someone else? There's a video online with the man who designed the cover.
No.
And the process, this is when he designed the original cover, it was layers of cut paper. But there's a video online that actually shows how he designed and imagined the cover and made the mock-up for the cover. So aside from, that's like a complete book nerd thing, but if you want to go online and see how the cover was, the video is really cool. But this is a young adult novel. It published last year. We're early in this year, published last year, but I will tell you, one of the best young adult books I've read in the past 12 months, and I've read a lot of really great books. David Yoon is married to Nicola Yoon, also incredible, talented author. I don't know what's going on in their house, but genius is there. The book was so instantly accessible, so full of humor, so full of heart. Just a brilliant talent. Before we get into what the story is about, the writing in this book is just breathtakingly outstanding. The characters, he pulls you into the family of the characters and the world of the characters so quickly. But then there are just paragraphs of just beautiful writing where Frank is sharing his inner thoughts. Anyway, our main character's name is Frank Lee. He is a senior in high school. It's the beginning of his senior year when the book opens. He is the son of Korean immigrants. His parents moved to the United States. They live in California 20 years or so before with another group, with other families. About 6 couples all moved over together. They've remained friends all their lives. Their children all know each other, and they have these regular gatherings where the parents talk in Korean and they share their Korean news, and the children all hang out, and they're all friendly towards each other, but they don't interact much with each other at school. Frank has never had a girlfriend, in part because he feels he's a little socially awkward and nerdy, but also because his parents are very strict in their idea that Frank should only date Korean girls. And Frank sees that makes the dating pool for him very small and very fraught. And so he just decides it's not worth the trouble. So he's never had a girlfriend. So his sister Hannah lives in Boston. She's estranged from the family because she married a man who is Black, and their parents will not talk with her. They will not have them in her home. So Frank just doesn't want to deal with all of that, and he misses his sister terribly.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a girl in one of his classes named Britt who is white, and they start a friendship that turns into more of a romance. One of the other children in the gathering, Joy, is dating a boy who is Chinese, also not something her parents would approve of. And so Joy and Frank hatch a plot. Well, they will pretend to be dating each other so they can go around behind their parents' back to see their actual real boyfriends and girlfriends.
What could go wrong?
Like what could possibly go wrong? And they don't tell the boyfriend and the girlfriend that they're doing this. So to add even more complications. Now, that's only the first conflict in the book.
Right.
And it is an overarching one, but in more ways, it's really, yes, it's about this piece, but it's really a book about families, about tradition, about culture, about having one foot in the lives and the expectations of your parents, no matter what your background is. Lots of rich conversations in the book about kids and their parents. And even when they have loving parents, the challenges of trying to find your own way in the world while very much being held to the standards of your parents' expectations. I thought it was a fantastic book, very rich in its characterization, the layers of the story. Although the romance is certainly a foundational part of it, it's not even one of the many conversations going on in the book. Anyway, I could go on and on, Jennifer, and I will tell you the audiobook was outstanding. The narrator was fluent in Korean and read several pages that were just in Korean, if you remember certain scenes in the book.
Yeah, I listened to it as well.
Yes. Very well done.
And it's also, even though there's some parts in it, like I remember one scene that stands out to me is, I don't remember the actual context, but I remember Frank talking about this terrible, terrible feeling he had wishing his parents spoke better English, and what a betrayal that felt to him, like to just think that I wish my parents were better at being this culture that they weren't born into. And while there's lots of scenes like that help you get immersed in this experience of a first generation American, and that the wedge that puts between those kids and their parents, that book is also freaking funny.
Oh
yes,
funny. Yes, the voice, you can't even communicate that. The voice is so, sometimes when an adult writes in the voice of a teenager and it's witty, it almost comes off as being unnatural.
Right.
As in, kids would never talk like this unless they were in a John Hughes movie.
Exactly.
You and I get that reference. I don't know if
I do, exactly.
But you know what I'm talking about. And so, but this book isn't like that. Like, he nails the voice and Frank is hilarious. His friend Q is one of my favorite characters in the book. His best friend Q.
Yeah.
He's hilarious. Frank even says one of the things that he's looking for in a girl is that he wants someone who will make him laugh.
Yeah.
that's important to him. So no, it's the kind of book you could see being made into hopefully a decent movie.
Right.
You know, I think it hits all the notes.
Yeah. No, I loved it. And in fact, I added it to my young adult class syllabus for next semester because I just thought it was so extraordinarily well done. And I think that balance between sort of ripping your heart out, expanding your thinking, and then also just making you belly laugh is really hard to strike. I mean,
Hard
that,
out for me in a book. Yeah.
so wow, great.
Well, one of the trends I'm noticing in books, do I have time for one more?
You have time for anything. I'll just sit here and listen to you all day. Go
Well,
on. I've got my coffee. I'm ready to go.
I've got my water. I've got my little stack of books, Jennifer. Thank you. But I'm noticing, you know, you try when you read a lot of books and you talk to people about books a lot like we do, and when you're asked for recommendations like we are, I'm always trying to look for what are those trends? What are those sea changes I see happening in the children and young adult book world? What kind of books are coming out? What do I notice? And one of the things that I've noticed in the past few years is more romances, particularly young adult romances. I'm seeing more and more of those, although they've always been there. I'm also seeing a wave of science fiction and fantasy again, which actually kind of, I think, dipped down a little bit for the past few years as we focused more on contemporary realistic fiction stories.
Hmm.
But what I am noticing about these new romances, these new science fiction books, these new fantasy books, is that who gets to be the protagonist has changed.
Hmm.
That it is not just the white English kids who are the magicians, that it's not just the beautiful cheerleader and the football player having the romance, that we see queer kids and kids of color and chunky kids and all nerdy kids, they all get to be the hero in a story. They all get to be the lead in a love story.
Yeah.
There's just incredible. I think it's just incredible that we have these books. Frankly in Love certainly fits the bill because they all call themselves super nerds in that book, and I love it.
Right.
But this one is another one that I think
Um,
fits into that conversation too. So I just started Children of Virtue and Vengeance by Tomi Adeyemi. It's the
mhm.
second book in the series. I've just learned it's going to be a trilogy, which makes me very sad because I'm already looking at this book and
Oh,
I'm saying, if this is a trilogy,
yep.
I'm going to have to wait a while because this book just came out late last year.
Right.
I read the first book, The Children of Blood and Bone. I listened to it on the audio.
Hmm.
Um, and Bonnie Turpin does the audio production. That book is 700 pages long, I believe, the first book. And so I listened to it in the audio because packing a 700-page book for a trip
I
is
know.
ridiculous. You're adding 18 pounds to your luggage and you're carrying a brick around with you. So I put it on the audio and it was fantastic. But now, of course, reading the second one, we're back in the world of Orisha, where mages
Yes.
and everyday people have been at war. The magi, the magic users in this world have been oppressed. They've had their powers taken from them. They've been enslaved. Um, I don't want to give away anything about that first book, so I will just say that this book picks up where the other one left off. We've got the same incredible characters. We've got Zaylee, our main character from the first book. We've got all the cast of characters are back. This book basically picks up where the first one leaves off. I think the first book did a great job of tying up, the sign of a good series to me, especially a fantasy series, as someone who has read a lot of them over my life. Think of Harry Potter, which many of us know.
Right.
You have the overarching conflict in the story, the
Mm,
battle of good and evil that has to be resolved before the whole series can end. But each individual book has some kind of main conflict that also
right.
can be resolved within the pages of the book. I find talking to kids, they think that's more satisfying. Kids really don't like it when a book ends and the story and it's a cliffhanger and they have to wait 3 months or 6 months
Right.
or a year for another book. So I think a good author the reader can be with you for the long haul over this main conflict. They
Mhm.
will, but they need to have some resolutions of some
Right.
story arcs, some plot points, some way we're advancing towards that goal. And I think the best series do this. And Tomi Adeyemi certainly does this in this series.
I'm
I
excited
think
to
the
read
world
that.
building in this series is fantastic.
Oh yeah. But I've had this conversation with others, and I'm a big fan of fantasy, sci-fi, dystopian. I love those genres and those books. And as much as I get sucked into a world when it's well done, for me, the thing that makes the difference between just a good series and a really excellent one are the characters that I fall in love with and care about and invested in or hate or need to know more about. It really falls down to the characters and the people, and do I relate to them or do I want to know more about them, etc. And I found that in Children of Blood and Bone that I was all in with these characters and was invested in their journey and cared about what happened to them and needed to know, and was, even though there was a satisfying resolution in the first book to hold you over to the second one, I still found myself anxious for what was going to happen to them next, enough to want to read the second one, which is on my shelf. Yeah.
And you read that book and she does not pull any punches. Every character, main characters,
Yep.
love interest, parents, rulers, lead magicians, everyone could potentially die at any moment, and many of them do, quite
Right.
violently.
Exactly.
She's constantly reeling you into the lives of a character that she kills right in front
of you. It's like the Game of Thrones for young people.
Over and over again. Oh yeah, it's like Game of Thrones, where you could even care about the sheep on the hill because a dragon was going to come eat them.
They're going to be destroyed. Yeah.
Any character, but growing up like I did, reading a lot of fantasy and sci-fi, most of that was set in that European world.
Yes.
But the best fantasy stories that I read as a kid, it was the unlikely hero.
Mm-hmm.
It was the pig boy.
It reminds me of.
It was the pig boy. It was the Hobbit. And I at 10 years old, I sure felt the unlikely part. I didn't always feel the hero part. And so reading those books kind of gave me a little hope. I was like, yeah, okay. So, sometimes the nerdy little mousy kid in the corner with a plan actually does save the day. Yeah. So
it reminds me of a book that I wish had been more famous than it was, like a book that I felt deserved a lot more praise than it actually got, was Patrick Ness's The Rest of Us Just Live Here. And I don't know if you ever read that book,
yes,
but
I read all of Patrick Ness's books.
So, for those who haven't, the premise is it's this group of like ragtag misfit kids who live in the world of Katniss Everdeen or Harry Potter, et cetera, except for they're just the normal Joe who they're the muggles. Like they don't have any of the magical powers, right?
Spectators, the bystanders, they're the ones that get crushed in the butt.
Right. And in the very beginning of the book, the main character, whose name escapes me now because it's been years since I read it, he's queer, his best friend's Black, and he says, we can't be the heroes in this story because we're not the perfect teeth, white, straight, etc. And so they take, and this was years ago, this jab at the genre where just the regular average kid doesn't get to be the hero that they have to be in this prototype. And I just loved that book. And so when I read a book like Children of Blood and Bone or some of the others in this trend that you were talking about, it feels redemptive. Like it feels like, yes, these kids from way back in the day get to be the hero. And I love that.
She really digs into that, though. She looks at prejudice. She looks at class warfare. She looks at monarchies. She looks at the destruction of the natural world. She looks at greed. She looks at war. She looks at the roles of women in a society. It's just like the best epic books of all, looking at those rich universal themes underneath while she's weaving this beautiful story. Anyway, I'm excited about reading this one, but I may have to read it pretty slowly, Jennifer, because I'm not getting book 3 anytime soon.
I know.
This is Dawn's reading The Toll right now.
Oh, well, that's a whole other conversation for another day. I loved that series as well.
Well, I finished it. Dawn's right behind me. Sarah's reading The Toll also.
Well, I shared this story with Brad not that long ago, but I think you can appreciate it as well. You know, one time I was reading this series that I was absolutely convinced was a trilogy, and I got about 3/4 of the way through book 2, only to learn that it was only a duology. And my heart I've never recovered. I'm to this day still broken.
Bardugo? I'm just going to
Yes,
ask you.
yes,
Yes,
it
I
was.
knew exactly which duology. It's like I had to look up the word duology because of those books. I didn't know what it was.
Oh, it broke
Oh,
me in a way. I just
seriously.
can't. I just can't. But anyway, I'm so tickled you took time to do this with me today.
Wait, do you have time for one more book?
Of course, go do it.
Okay. So, nonfiction. I know
Okay.
you're into nonfiction. You and I are always talking about how we want to read even more of it. I am still a science nerd at heart. So this is Tracking Pythons, The Quest to Catch an Invasive Predator and Save an Ecosystem by Kate Messner. And here's what I know about my friend Kate, who was a journalist. She was a teacher. She is also a crazy science and history nerd. It's the woman does her research.
Yes.
She goes right to the museum. She goes right to the primary source. And I know she was out tromping around in a swamp with knee boots on to research this book. But
Wow.
pythons, and talking to the scientists who are studying them, but pythons in areas like the Everglades are not an indigenous species. They're not native to the area. They're not endemic, is the word that scientists use. And so pythons, people have gotten pythons and used them for pets. Well, when their baby python gets out and escapes, or
Right.
they decide they don't want to take care of the python anymore and they flush it down a drain, those pythons get into the water system. And because it is not their natural habitat, they have no natural predators. There are not jaguars. There are not other things that naturally predate on pythons in this area. So these pythons are becoming a nuisance. They're not only eating and destroying animals, habitats like birds, other
Yeah.
reptiles, small mammals that do live in the Everglades, but they're now starting to threaten human populations of pets
Mm-hmm.
and other things. So these scientists are trying to go down, and it's more daunting of a problem than just having a python hunt. They can't possibly.
Right.
So the book goes into the scientists who are studying these pythons. It really just goes into a lot of what I just condensed as far as food webs, ecosystems, predators, and what scientists are doing to try to stop this, because this is a problem in a lot of communities where zebra mussels or some kind of barnacle or some kind of algae gets moved from one ecosystem to the other, and then it wreaks havoc. So very interesting. I think a lot of science teachers will love it, and Kate knows how to put that science in a way that kids will find it engaging.
When you held that book up, it looked like a picture book, but what grade levels would you
I
recommend
would
it for?
say I would say upper elementary, even into middle school, Jennifer. I think
Uh-huh.
because for its research value and just the depth of resources here, it's longer than a picture book. I would solve. I mean, you're looking at quite
Oh,
some
yeah.
extensive text here. I would say upper elementary, middle school probably would be the sweet
That's
spot.
great.
But I would have it in a middle school classroom.
And kids would love it. That cover, I know tons of middle school kids who would pick it up.
I mean, it goes on the trifecta, right? Snakes,
Yeah.
penguins. What else would be the hot animals? Sloth.
I'd be doing like a snakes on a plane parody, like snakes in a library or something. I'd be trying to.
You know how it is. I taught that age of kid, and I know you worked with that age of kid too.
Yeah.
Thing with snake, ugly, cute animals for the
Yeah.
win always, and then penguins
Absolutely.
forever.
Yeah, I love it. I love Kate Messner books in general for all the reasons that you mentioned. She's a machine. Like she just keeps cranking them out.
There's 12 books coming out this year.
I know. I mean, that's amazing.
She is very organized and very disciplined, and I think her years as a journalist and a teacher and a mom.
I think the other thing I would say about her, she's just so generous with educators, how she curates the list of Skype authors who will Skype with your class for free, how she organizes World Read Aloud, you know what I mean? Or a read aloud event. I don't want to misquote the title, but she's very much engaged with educators around reading and is super generous of her time. And I really appreciate that.
Well, that's a good reminder that World Read Aloud Day is February the 5th. And
You
you
like
can
how I did
go
that?
online to just Google World Read Aloud Day. And Lit World has all sorts of resources for teachers and librarians who want to sign up their schools for World Read Aloud Day.
Yeah.
It's always a fun event.
And
Jennifer,
I know I speak for you, Donalyn, when I say kids of all ages love to be read too.
yes, they do.
Yeah. So y'all, well, thank you, Donalyn. This has been amazing.
Thank
Can
you so
we
much.
just do this all the time?
A gloomy day, so much sunnier, Jennifer. Thank you.
I want to do this every day, so let's make it happen.
You know what? If every day of my life had book talks with you in it, Jennifer, that would be a great day.
Well, let's just plan on at least one more day. We'll plan on another day soon.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And thank you to everyone who watched today. If you would like to get a list and check out our archives of all the books we've recommended over the time that we've been doing this show, then just visit bit.ly/read_this_now. Until then, we'll see you next Tuesday. Thank you again, my friend.
Thanks, Jennifer. Talk
and
to you.
Happy reading, everyone.